In the USA, the death penalty is legal in 24 states, and there's a moratorium in 3 more. This means that capital punishment, something that has been around as long as humans have, is legal in a country that stands for justice for all. But how effective is capital punishment? I remember in my sophomore AP language class, we read Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, and for more context, my teacher gave us details on the death penalty, including statistics and mistakes that have been made on it, and murders at the actual time. And what I found about the details about the death penalty, not just putting a murderer to death, but what actually happens, has changed my perspective on the death penalty extremely. So what I will leave you with from this presentation is a better understanding of the prison system, how the death penalty works, and how I believe we should reform the prison system and structure communities. So first I want to show you how the prison system works for normal criminals. So once you have a violation, you get a ticket, and then you either get on bail or you don't get on bail. So once you're arrested, you'll be booked, and then you'll pay your bail and get on free, and then go to trial, or you will have to stay in prison until your trial, and then you will either be released or sentenced. So for someone with the death penalty, they would likely be flagged as dangerous or a flight risk, so they wouldn't be able to be put on bail. They would have to stay in the prison the whole time during their trial. And during this time, it's very dangerous, the conditions of the prison. People get murdered in there, they get beat up. It's not a good place to stay, especially if you are innocent, then you're just in an area with a lot of crime for no reason. And at the same time as this process is going on, there's a bunch of other people also going on trial and having their hearings. So it can take an extremely long time to figure out how long you're going to be sentenced. And then for prisoners, once they're convicted of the death penalty, it's even more complicated. At their trial, they need a unanimous decision to be sentenced to death. And then they are kept in solitary confinement, away from everyone. They eat the same rotation of food, and they have minimal contact with their family. And the knowledge of their execution hangs over their heads for every waking moment of every day. And once the death penalty is actually going to take place, the governor has to sign a warrant for their death. So how the death penalty works, when you're on death row, on average, it takes 20 to 40 years till your actual execution happens. And then once it's time for your execution, it's most likely that it would be lethal injection, but prisoners can request other means like hanging, firing squad, gas chamber, and electrocution. For the gas chamber, the most recent death was in the 90s, which is crazy recent. So these people have to endure so much suffering to pay for their crimes, but this isn't ancient Babylon, and we don't do an eye for an eye in America. So it's unusual for a country with such legislation against cruel and unusual punishments to have such a cruel and unusual crime. We don't legally torture our criminals or threaten their families' lives, nor do we use other tactics like golden bore torture or draw and quarter them, or psychological torture like white room torture. So why do we lock people in a blank room by themselves with rare external stimuli and no goals or productivity to attend to? Damon Eccles, an inmate who was released on death row and has since been released, or who was on death row and has since been released, said, "I miss the stars. You know, I haven't seen the stars in years and years and years. I miss the rain, I miss the food, I miss all these things. But what it comes down to the most, and this is the thing that will scar me the most and that I'll carry with me as a scar the longest, the thing I miss the most is being treated like a human." So this is a first-hand account of someone who was put on death row and then released because they were found innocent. And a statistician from Columbia University found that 190 people who sat on death row have been released, and 4% of people who have been put to death have been found innocent afterwards, which means that innocent people are being put to death because of mistakes from the justice system. And there is no excuse for putting people to death for a crime they did not commit. Corruption and bad intentions are likely causes to happen. So the prison system needs to be reformed to remove the cancerous workers and to stop treating them like animals. However, some people do believe that criminals deserve to be treated how they are now. So the benefits of the death penalty include revenge for the family of the person who was murdered. In most cases, the death penalty arose from murder charges. So some people believe that this helps with the grieving process. People want justice for their lost loved ones. Another way is to keep the streets safe from people who are capable of committing such atrocities, and keeping prison populations from overflowing with prisoners. So with the knowledge that a murderer is removed from this world, it's comforting to some, but people still have to work through the grief of such a loss either way, whether or not the murderer is dead. And in this situation, we are killing more people, which causes more people to have to grieve for their loved ones, which creates a chain of harm and are more than what would happen with just the previous crime being committed. I understand that these people had someone taken away from them in horrible ways, sometimes in ways that I couldn't imagine, but there are other methods to deal with this crime. There's still ways for murderers to stay off the streets and to keep prison populations from overflowing. That doesn't include the death penalty or life imprisonment without parole. While life imprisonment does keep criminals off the streets, it also keeps them living on the taxpayers' dollars, and nobody wants to pay for the food and housing for someone who has wronged them extremely. It will take prison reform, cooperation from the government, and lots of time. So the best way to reform a system is trying to include elements from it previously, so the whole thing doesn't have to be torn down and rebuilt, which is why I want to focus on changing the housing situation of prisoners. This way, there will be alternatives to permanent housing, so they won't stay a strain on taxpayers and won't lose their lives to the system in one way or another. First, the money that would have been spent on housing will instead be spent on cost-effective rehabilitation programs and improving what it's like to live in the prison system. This can be done by investing in therapists and comforting housing, as it's proven that if prisoners aren't spent in constant fight or flight, then they would be able to focus more on helping themselves through therapy and other programs that a prison system would allow. Already, some prisons allow for sports teams and college programs and the creative arts to help prisoners learn how to process their emotions. So once they're released from prison, they will have these coping mechanisms and know how to handle themselves in the real world without constant supervision. And currently, the Bar Prison Initiative is being used in a New York prison where prisoners, while they are incarcerated, can earn a liberal arts degree. So once they're released back into the world, they have that to take with them, and they'll be able to stay on their feet better. And this has been proven to lower recidivism rates, which is the rate of someone coming back to prison after having gone there once. So money set aside from prison reform can also be spent on the victims' families and helping them grieve or get back on their feet. This process of restorative justice, which will focus on rehabilitation instead of harsh punishment, will let the offender take responsibility for their actions, make amends for their victims and their communities when possible, and better themselves as individuals, as they won't be as likely to come back to prison. Another way to keep recidivism rates lower is by helping the prisoners more with their transition to the real world. This can be done by making a prison seem less like an alien planet and more comforting, which is what I previously stated, by adding student decorations and real jobs. Instead of having everyone wake up on a strict schedule, they can write their own plan, and the guards can help them with it, which would allow them to learn how to schedule how they would in the real world. Once you're out and you have your own job, there are people making sure you're awake at 6 a.m. every day. So it's a very important skill of scheduling, which is a necessity in all workplaces. In addition to this alternative, more extreme prison reform is vital to our country. The way the staff treats prisoners, overcrowding, underfunding, continue the cycle of crime within the prison, as everyone is desperate to just get by. Prisons should be given the funds to no longer throw prisoners in back rooms to be forgotten, but be educated and rehabilitated so they can be functional members of society. In addition to this, it's important for the staff to be trained in substance abuse issues and mental health issues. This, with the pairing of on-site therapists, would help improve mental health services and treat underlying mental health conditions that can often be undermined due to the amount of people in the prison. So once these issues are treated, which can contribute to criminal behavior, will lower recidivism rates, and substance abuse issues should also be treated, as treatment for substance abuse can significantly help people who are suffering from addiction who would otherwise be law-abiding citizens. People can be more likely to suffer from addiction if they are genetically predisposed or come from high-risk populations. So these programs would help other people who just need support and structure in their lives. The extra support mixed with preventative measures can also significantly help the reduction of crime. The National Institute of Justice found that in schools, the coaching of thinking skills in high-risk youth is extremely effective in crime prevention, as well as providing kids with structure that they wouldn't normally find in their homes. If we further invest in preventative measures in early childhood education, social services, and strong community development, the structure that would be provided for these kids would increase exponentially to remove the root cause of criminal behavior, which is most commonly identified as the effects of poverty and lack of education. If we reduce the usual punitive measures of the prison system and emphasize these tactics, the crime rate should lower in both extreme and petty crimes. The death penalty is a practice as old as humankind itself, yet is an extremely polarizing issue in the USA. Despite the fact that it is legal in 23 states, its effectiveness and moral justification are hotly debated. Additionally, the risk of wrongful executions paired with the inhumane methods eliminates the riskiness of the death penalty and how unethical it really is. Inmates confined to their cell for decades at a time raises the question of how justice is really being served with such a cruel and unusual punishment. The words of Damon Eagles, the former death row inmate who asked to simply be treated like a human, haunts the whole prison system with the imagery of the dehumanization that really goes on. The best option to fix the unrighteous ongoings is to reform the prison system entirely. The problems of overpopulation, undereducation, and lack of structure in communities are underaddressed when discussing the budgeting of funds for the prison system. Addressing overcrowding and ensuring public safety can be achieved through alternatives to the death penalty. Comprehensive reform for old prisoners can help release lower-level criminals and allow worse offenders the opportunity to be released after the completion of multiple programs or the ability to work and learn whilst incarcerated. Investing in preventative programs will also help the number of initial incarcerations. Proponents of the death penalty that argue for the retribution for the victims' families can be replaced by programs that will help them through their grieving process. With the decrease in prison populations, rehabilitation of those who are incarcerated, the death penalty would be obsolete. Okay, are there any questions? Okay.